Hello and welcome to the 8th broadcast of the Nerdflix podcast. Today's Star Wars topic, continuing our 5-part Star Wars series with part 4, we are going to cover the Star Wars sequels. That's The Force Awakens, The Last Jedi, and The Rise of Skywalker. So let's get started. Hey, it's time for Nerdflix! Nerdflix! Welcome to the Nerdflix podcast. The Force Awakens is the 2015, I guess you could say, reboot of the Star Wars trilogy, covering the sequels of the original trilogy. The Force Awakens, the first movie we're going to cover here, is actually the Star Wars movie that made the most money in box office out of all Star Wars movies ever. Force Awakens made up to the billions in box office worldwide, beating out any other Star Wars movie ever made. Force Awakens starts off the Star Wars series about Rey living on the desert planet of Jakku and gets sent off in a series of events to other planets, meets Finn and Poe and BB-8, other characters from the new Star Wars sequels, and we see some of the old characters, Chewbacca, Han Solo, Princess Leia, and at the very end, we see again Luke Skywalker. The movie ends with Rey finally tracking down Luke Skywalker and handing him his own lightsaber that she had found earlier in the movie. In the final cut of The Force Awakens, the one we all know, Luke Skywalker hardly has any screen time. Like I just mentioned, he only shows up at the very end of the movie. But in the original script, in the original idea for Force Awakens, Luke had a lot more screen time. In fact, he was in the entire movie. And a lot of the new characters got overshadowed by the fact that Luke was in the whole movie. Luke would kind of, steal the show, steal the spotlight. There'd be more of a spotlight on Luke, and people wouldn't be able to focus on the new characters. So Luke only ended up showing up at the end so people could focus more on the new characters they introduced. Because if Luke had been in the entire movie, the new characters would have been drowned out. We all know the planet of Jakku, where Rey is from, a desert planet very similar to the planet of Tatooine, as we see in A New Hope. But the original idea for this planet would have been new, unique, and nothing like Tatooine, and really nothing like we've ever seen before. It almost would have been a cross between Hoth and Mustafar from Revenge of the Sith. It would have been more like Iceland or Norway. They describe it as a volcanic ice world. Basically Hoth, but with volcanoes. Hoth meets Mustafar. And it would have been really unique. And it would have been really different than the desert planet of Jakku, which is basically Tatooine. And I feel like it would have made the story seem a little different. The new villain we're introduced to in this movie is Kylo Ren. And also, as we find out later in the movie, he is Han Solo's son, Ben Solo. But the original name for Kylo Ren was actually going to be something much different. The original name for Kylo Ren is going to be Starkiller. And we know that name from 3 different places. The first place, we know the name Starkiller from the sequels. Actually, Starkiller Base, the big Death Star-like base that we see in Force Awakens, where Kylo Ren and all the other First Order people are stationed on. So, that's the first place where we know the name Starkiller from. Second place, as I mentioned 2 podcasts ago, on Nerdflix number 6, when we covered the original trilogy, is Starkiller was the original last name for Luke. The original name for Luke Skywalker would have been Luke Starkiller. And they changed it to Luke Skywalker. So that's the second place we know the name Starkiller from. The third place is from the video games and comics. Throughout the video games and comics, we see an apprentice that Darth Vader had, which is these things are out of canon, so they don't really contribute to the Skywalker saga at all. But they do talk about and show that Darth Vader has an apprentice, so he can train, and with the apprentice, he can kill Emperor Palpatine, so he can become the Emperor. And this apprentice's name is also Star Killer. So there's 3 places we know Star Killer from, and Kylo Ren was originally going to be called Star Killer, because he's almost like an apprentice of Darth Vader, even though he never knew him, he still looks up to him. So it would have been a hint to previous things, but they ended up changing it to Kylo Ren, but still using the name Star Killer in Star Killer Base. Star Wars is famous for reusing old scrapped ideas and designs. I've talked about that on previous episodes with the Wookiee planet Kashyyyk being a scrapped idea from Return of the Jedi, and then being brought back up from the ashes to be a planet in Revenge of the Sith. BB-8 was actually a scrapped idea for R2-D2. They wanted to have that same round soccer ball form that BB-8 does have for R2-D2. But at the time, they didn't have the technology to do that. But since now they do have the technology to run something like that, they can. So they ended up using that scrapped idea. And many other scrapped ideas and designs ended up being used, again, for other Star Wars movies. And one of them I do want to talk about is Maz Kanata's palace from The Force Awakens. This was a scrapped idea for Darth Vader's palace. Darth Vader was supposed to have a palace that would appear in Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. We do see Darth Vader's palace in comics and video games, and then we do get a glimpse of it in Rogue One. But he was supposed to have a palace that appeared in Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. And this was a scrapped idea, like I said, but they took it out of, let's say, the imaginary trash bin. They picked up that idea, and they used the design to make Maz's palace in The Force Awakens. With The Force Awakens, we're also introduced to a new character named Poe Dameron, who is a X-Wing pilot for the Resistance. But Poe had all sorts of different things going on with him when they were planning the character. He was supposed to be many different things, and they had many ideas for him. One having him be a bounty hunter, similar to Boba Fett or Jango Fett. Another having him be a young Jedi. But no matter what idea they were going to use, they were sure that he was going to die early in the movie. In fact, they were pretty much positive on it. No matter where he went, whether it be a bounty hunter or a Jedi or an X-Wing pilot, they knew for sure he was going to die at the beginning. Not the beginning, but very early in the movie. And obviously they never ended up doing that because he lived the entire movie, and he was in the movies for the next 2 movies after that. And, he never ends up dying. He just keeps going, and then they just end the movies at Rise of Skywalker. But he was supposed to die early in the movie when Finn and Poe escape the Star Destroyer, and they crash the TIE Fighter on Jakku. At that point, we think Poe is dead, and then he ends up showing back up later in the movie. But originally, he was just supposed to die there, and that was the end of Poe. We never see him again. But obviously, they decided not to do that, and he continued in the next 2 movies. The next movie we'll be talking about is The Last Jedi. This movie is the sequel to Force Awakens and continues with the same character. In this movie, Leia comes close to dying, but she flies back into the ship like Mary Poppins. I'm not the biggest fan of that. It seems a little corny, but we'll move past that and go on. Kylo Ren's helmet is now smashed, so he doesn't really wear it in this movie. We spend more time with Luke Skywalker. Luke Skywalker's not really being interested in going back into the ways of the Jedi. In fact, when he finally takes a lightsaber from Rey, he just throws it over his shoulder. But this is quite the good movie, and it has a lot of space battles, on-ground battles, and it's really one of the best movies of the sequels. This movie is the longest running movie of all Star Wars movies. It runs 155 minutes long, And the longest movie prior to that was Attack of the Clones, but this beat it out with 155 minutes long, being the longest movie out of all of the Star Wars movies. This movie introduces the Porgs, these small little creatures that seem to be a mix between a penguin and a baby seal. I am not the biggest fan of them. I feel sometimes they can be a little annoying, but, they're not Jar Jar Binks. But what they do seem like is an attempt for some extra cash for Disney, an attempt to sell, zillions of merchandise for Porgs. And while they did, that wasn't what they were created for. They were actually created out of desperation. Because when they filmed The Last Jedi, the parts with Luke on that island, which is actually a real island in Ireland, since they were filming, in Ireland, on a real island, there were wildlife, and the island is covered in puffins. And because they're protected by some wildlife laws, you can't just take them off the island. So that wasn't an option, but there was just puffins running around everywhere. So what they decided to do is that it was easier to put CGI something in the place of the puffins instead of digitally removing them. So they put Porgs in place of them, and then after that, that's when they realized they can make zillions of extra dollars selling zillions more of their merchandise. So that's when they forced the Porg more into the movie. But it did start with the Porg being there just out of desperation so they could not have the puffins in the background of the movie. In this movie, Finn and a new character named Rose have to go to a casino to find a master codebreaker. And this casino was the largest, most expensive set ever made in Star Wars history. And this is the second thing that The Last Jedi broke in Star Wars history, that being the longest running movie. This set took 16 weeks to build. 16 whole weeks. That is a long time. And it was the largest, most expensive set out of all Star Wars sets ever created. When Mark Hamill first read the original writing for the script, he was unhappy with the way Luke's character was progressing and heading. He was basically just unhappy with the movie. But after a few changes, he was pleased with it, and he said that he was pleased with the outcome of the movie. But at first, he was unhappy with the way the movie was going. When Force Awakens ends, it ends with Rey trying to hand Luke Skywalker his lightsaber, and when he finally takes it at the beginning of The Last Jedi, like I said, he throws it over his shoulder, but when he does take it, you can see his robotic hand since he loses his hand in Empire Strikes Back. But if you look very closely, you can see a blaster mark, blaster damage on his robotic hand. And this is a hint. Now, this is just some great continuity for you. This is a hint to, and, being accurate to the plot, when in Return of the Jedi, with Luke's robotic hand, it gets shot while fighting Jabba the Hutt's, gang during the scene at the Sarlacc pit in Return of the Jedi. And it leaves blaster damage. So you can see clear blaster damage on Luke's hand as he grabs the lightsaber. One of the things that The Last Jedi introduces is the idea of hyperspace tracking. Tracking ships through hyperspace. That's what the First Order does to the Resistance ship and basically follows them the whole time, basically the entire movie. And this is a brand new thing, we've never really seen this before, but it has been hinted at, which is not an easy thing to catch. But if you have seen Rogue One, a prequel to the original trilogy taking place between Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope, taking place mostly shortly before A New Hope, basically the entire idea of the movie is getting the Death Star plans to the rebels so they could blow up the Death Star. Well, when Jyn, the main character of Rogue One, is looking for the Death Star plans on an Imperial base, she does come across plans for hyperdrive tracking. You just see it very briefly pass by, but it are plans for developing hyperdrive tracking. So that's some pretty cool hints there. The last movie we'll talk about today is the last installment in the sequels and the last installment in the Skywalker saga. This movie being Rise of Skywalker. This movie was one of my favorite Star Wars movies of all time. My only problem I would have with it really is that one of the main things was R2-D2 didn't get enough screen time. I feel like R2-D2 was kind of cast to the side, even though he's basically a hero throughout the prequels and original trilogy. But overall, it was a really excellent end to the Skywalker saga, being one of the two or three best films of 2019. Some other good films of 2019 being Avengers Endgame and Spider-Man Far From Home. But Rise of Skywalker was definitely one of them, and it was definitely an excellent film. This movie involves finding a way to the secret planet where the Sith has been hiding for a very long time, and where the Sith has cloned Emperor Palpatine. Can this guy die? I don't know. Can anybody die in Star Wars? I mean, Darth Maul came back in Solo and the Clone Wars, and Palpatine came back. So there's a lot of people, especially Sith, coming back from the dead, but sometimes it can make a good plot, and Rise of Skywalker, it really did. Palpatine's back via Sith cloning, and he's working with Kylo Ren, and Palpatine's henchmen have put Kylo Ren's helmet back together with a cool kind of red glow to it where the cracks were in the helmet. And a lot happens, and it's really good movie, like I just mentioned. And it's a really great way to end the Skywalker saga. And it ends with a big, space fight on the Sith planet. These millions of starships come from all over the galaxy, being led by the return of Lando Calrissian, along with Chewbacca. And these millions of starships come and they help fight with the rebels. And then they ride some space horses on top of a Star Destroyer. Some people aren't big fans of that, but, you can only do so much. You can't make your entire audience happy. But I thought it was a very good movie. In the scene I just described, when the millions of starships show up to help the rebels fight at the end of the movie, one of the people you catch for a second in one of the ships is the very own Wedge Antilles from the original trilogy, being played by Dennis Lawson. Fun fact, his nephew is Ewan McGregor. Yes, Ewan McGregor who plays Obi-Wan Kenobi in the prequels. Very interesting. I didn't know that till recently. Just a random fun fact. But anyways, he does show up as a cameo in Rise of Skywalker. When Palpatine first meets Kylo Ren, he says something that's a direct quote that he says in the prequels. Palpatine is basically just quoting himself that he says to the prequels to Anakin Skywalker. He says when he meets Kylo Ren, the dark side of the Force is a pathway to many abilities some consider to be unnatural. Palpatine says word by word exactly that to Anakin Skywalker, and then says that to Kylo Ren in Rise of Skywalker. So he's basically quoting himself, but it's a cool reference back to the prequels. At the end of Rise of Skywalker, when Palpatine finally gets killed, his face melts, just like in a very gory, face-melting fashion. And this is a direct reference back to one of the best films of all time, the 1981 movie starring Harrison Ford, directed by Steven Spielberg, and written by George Lucas, Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. This is a complete reference to the faces melting at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark, which I promise you in the future I will cover that as one of my episodes. I don't know when, but I will do that sometime. And his face just melts, just like the faces melt at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark. And this is a great reference, especially to be referenced to in such a big movie. In this movie, we do see that new Force healing ability. And in this movie, you see it for the first time when Rey uses it to heal that sandworm thing. And some think that this is the first time we see Force healing, but it's not. If you watched any of the episodes of The Mandalorian that came out before the release of Rise of Skywalker, you would have seen Baby Yoda briefly demonstrate Force healing. And Baby Yoda was actually the one who basically first demonstrated Force healing and first used it, not Rey. Also, at the end of the movie, we hear a bunch of voices of previous Jedi. And there is a lot. Here are some of the voices we hear. We hear Anakin Skywalker. We hear Mace Windu, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and what's interesting is we hear voices of Ewan McGregor and Alec Guinness, both actors to play Obi-Wan Kenobi. We hear Yoda, Qui-Gon Jinn, but we also hear a couple people from cartoons such as Clone Wars and Rebels. We hear a person named Luminara. We hear Ahsoka, Elia Seekera, Adia Galia, and Canon Juris. The first 4 being from Star Wars The Clone Wars, and the last one being from Star Wars Rebels. What's interesting is these things are cartoons, and it's cool that we have features from those in this movie. Okay, that wraps up this episode of Nerdflix. I hope you'll join us next week to listen to me cover the Star Wars spin-offs. I'll be covering Rogue One and Solo, A Star Wars Story. That will be the last part 5 of our Star Wars series, so I hope you listen into that one. And until then, I will see you next week on Nerdflix. Hey, Nerdflix is over.